The station lobby was bright in a harmless way. Polished tile, humming lights, coffee that couldn't quite beat the lemon cleaner. At the front window, a clerk counted bills for a parking fine while Officer Mateo Grady stood near the center with Rex, the department's K9, letting the shepherd read the room the way he always did. Quiet, steady, unblinking. Rex wasn't doing tricks or soaking up praise. He was working without looking like he was working. Head slightly lowered, ears pivoting at every door chime, every footstep that changed pace. Mateo rested 2 fingers on the dog's harness out of habit, a light touch that meant nothing to most people and everything to Rex. Then the outer doors opened, and a little girl stepped in like a shadow that had learned to walk. She couldn't have been more than 8, jacket too big, hair pulled back with a tired elastic, hands tucked tight around a folded sheet of paper as if it might fly away. She didn't wander, didn't stare at the badge wall or the brochures. She came straight to Rex. Not to Mateo. Rex. The dog's body changed before Mateo's brain caught up. The tail stopped mid-sweep, the chest went still, and the air around him seemed to tighten, like someone had pulled a wire taut. Mateo's eyes narrowed. The girl stopped an arm's length away, polite and careful, and held the paper out with both hands. "For him," she said, voice small but steady. Mateo offered the practiced, friendly smile that officers used to keep things light. "That's nice. You make a picture?" The girl nodded once. Rex didn't move. A patrol officer nearby chuckled under his breath, the kind of laugh that belonged to a normal day. "K9's got fan mail," he said. Mateo took the paper slowly, not because he was humoring a child, but because Rex's stillness was never an accident. The sheet was warm from the girl's hands, creased down the middle. Crayon lines, heavy pressure. Someone who pushed hard, who didn't trust light marks to last. Mateo unfolded it, expecting a dog with a big smiling tongue, maybe a stick figure officer beside him. For half a second, his brain tried to make it that anyway. Then the details snapped into focus, and the smile fell clean off his face. It wasn't a cute drawing. It was a map. A road with a bend that matched the county's old river turn. A building sketched in blocky angles with a side door marked by a black X. A vehicle, boxy, white, drawn with a symbol on the panel. 3 slashes inside a circle. And in the corner, small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it, a figure with yellow hair behind thick bars, a single blue tear drawn so carefully it looked like it had been measured. Above it, in uneven letters, 1 word. Hush. Rex made the lowest sound Mateo had ever heard from him. Not a growl meant for show, but a warning meant for professionals. Mateo's pulse thudded once, hard. He looked up at the girl. Her eyes didn't plead, they confirmed. Mateo turned the paper slightly so the patrol officer could see. The chuckle died in his throat. The lobby seemed to dim, though the lights hadn't changed. And even the clerk behind the glass went still. Bills frozen mid-count. Mateo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He kept his hand on Rex's harness, kept his face calm, and said to the nearest officer, like he was calling the weather, "Lock the front door, now." Earlier that morning, the station didn't feel like a place where bad news lived. It felt like a community center with badges, the kind of small-town building that held lost wallets and found dogs, and the occasional argument that ended in an apology. A crisp breeze moved through the parking lot where the department had set up folding tables for the Meet Your Officers Day. And the scent of fresh coffee rolled out from a volunteer's urn like a promise that everything was fine. Kids ran between orange cones. Parents smiled with the polite ease of people who believed their town was too small for real trouble. and someone's old speaker played soft country music under the chatter. Mateo stood with Rex near the demonstration area, letting the dog soak up attention in measured doses. Rex accepted pats from sticky hands, leaned into scratches behind his ears, and posed with a patient dignity that made him look almost human. Calm eyes, mouth relaxed, tail moving slow and friendly. Mateo talked through basic commands, the sort of show and tell that kept people comfortable. Sit, stay, heel. He's trained to protect, Mateo said, voice easy, but he's also trained to think. Rex responded like he understood the compliment, trotting a neat circle around a cone and returning to Mateo's left side with the precision of a metronome. The crowd clapped. Cameras came out. A toddler squealed. For most of the morning, the day stayed soft. Then Mateo noticed the girl. She wasn't part of the noise. She stood near the edge of the event, under the thin shade of a scraggly tree, half hidden behind her guardian's legs. A woman who looked exhausted in the way that couldn't be fixed by sleep. The girl's jacket was too big, sleeves swallowing her hands, and her hair was pulled back with a stretched-out elastic that had lost its fight. She didn't wave at Rex like the other kids. She watched him the way you watched a lock click shut, like something important was happening that adults weren't naming. When Rex glanced her way, his posture softened for a beat, ears forward, eyes gentle. Then he looked away, as if he'd been taught not to stare. Mateo clocked the child's face and felt that quiet tug officers learned to respect. The sense that a person was carrying a story they shouldn't have to carry. During a lull, Mateo let Rex greet a few kids. Rex lowered himself so a little boy could hug his neck, accepted a paper cup of dog treats with dignified patience, and even licked a streak of frosting off a cupcake someone offered before Mateo gently redirected him. The dog was warmth on 4 legs. The crowd loved him for it. But twice, only twice, Rex changed. The first time, a tall man in a gray jacket drifted closer than he needed to, smiling too widely, eyes scanning the tables more than the people. Rex's tail stopped mid-swing, his head dipped. Not aggressive, alert. The second time, another adult, stocky, loud laughing, the kind of man who filled space like he was owed it, strode toward the canine area with a swagger that made Mateo's jaw tighten. Rex's ears pinned back for half a second, and his body angled subtly between Mateo and the crowd, like a door that had decided to close. Mateo gave a short command, soft, almost casual, and Rex returned to neutral, accepting the next child's pat like nothing happened. But Mateo saw it. He saw how Rex's attention followed those men just a fraction too long, saw how the dog's nostrils flared as if cataloging a scent for later. And through it all, that little girl stayed quiet, eyes steady, too old and too aware, as if she'd been waiting for the exact moment the town's pleasant mask slipped just enough to show her she wasn't imagining what she knew. As the morning rolled on, the crowd rotated like a slow tide. Families drifting from the coffee table to the squad car tour to the raffle box, while Rex remained the calm center of it, a living symbol people could touch. Mateo watched the way strangers tried to make him into a mascot, leaning in with phones and coaxing smiles, and he managed it with the practiced patience of a man who understood that public trust was built in small moments. Still, his eyes kept returning to the girl at the edge, because she was the only child not asking for something shiny. She didn't reach for the plastic badge stickers the volunteers handed out. She didn't beg to sit in the cruiser or press the siren button. She stood with her hands tucked into sleeves too long, gaze fixed on Rex as if the dog were the only honest thing in the parking lot. When Mateo stepped away to answer a question from an older couple, he saw her shift, small, deliberate, moving closer not to the table, but to the line of cones where Rex waited beside him. She approached in the careful way of someone used to measuring adults, like she'd learned the cost of taking up the wrong space. Her guardian stayed behind, distracted by a conversation with another parent, and the girl paused a few feet from Rex, not daring to assume she was allowed. Rex noticed her immediately. His head turned, eyes softening, and for the first time all morning, he took a step towards someone without being cued. Mateo felt it like a change in weather. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching to bring himself lower, less towering. "You like dogs?" The girl nodded once. Up close, her smile appeared, polite and quick, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes were steady. Too steady. And there were faint shadows beneath them, like she hadn't been sleeping right. Mateo had seen that look before on adults who'd been through something they couldn't talk about. And it hit him wrong to see it on a kid. Rex lowered his head and sniffed her hands through the long sleeves with careful delicacy, then leaned his shoulder into Mateo's knee, an old habit that said, "I'm here." The girl's shoulders loosened by a fraction, like she'd been holding herself tight all morning. She didn't ask to pet him. She didn't ask his name. Instead, she looked at Mateo's shirt pocket, where pens and a small notepad peeked out like tools of the trade. "Do you have paper?" she asked. Her voice was soft but purposeful, the way kids sounded when they were trying not to be overheard. Mateo blinked once, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, keeping his tone light as if she'd asked for a balloon. "I've got paper." He pulled out a clean sheet from his pad, careful not to make a show of it, and handed it to her along with a pen. She looked at the pen like it was too loud, then shook her head and pointed toward the craft table where volunteers had set out crayons for children to draw thank you cards for officers. "Crayons?" she said, barely a whisper. "Please." Mateo's attention sharpened. Kids asked for stickers and candy. They didn't ask for specific tools with that kind of quiet insistence. "Sure," he said, standing slowly. "Let's get you some." Rex moved with him, keeping close, and the girl followed as if the dog were a shield she could walk behind. At the craft table, she didn't pick bright, happy colors first. She chose black, then gray, then a hard red that looked more like warning than decoration. She sat with her knees pulled in, paper held flat, and started drawing with a pressure that made the crayons squeak. Mateo stayed nearby under the excuse of supervising Rex. But really he was watching the girl's hands, the way they trembled at the start and then steadied as she worked. Like drawing was the only place she could breathe. Every so often she glanced up at Rex to make sure he was still there. Rex remained calm, but his gaze never fully left her. And as the lines formed on the page, quick, practiced, strangely precise, Mateo felt the hair lift on his arms, because the kid wasn't doodling. She was documenting. She was choosing the dog because the dog couldn't be bribed, couldn't be charmed, couldn't be threatened into pretending. Rex was the only thing in town that would tell the truth without needing words. And somehow this little girl knew it. The air had that easy, harmless buzz only a small town could manage. Laughter like wind chimes, paper cups clinking, a child's high squeal as someone posed for a photo beside the cruiser, until a different kind of presence pushed into it like smoke. Mateo noticed him before he heard him, because Rex noticed him first. Dog's head turned, ears angling toward the sound of boots on asphalt that carried too much confidence. The man appeared between two tables with a grin that looked friendly from a distance and predatory up close, the kind of smile that demanded you smile back. He was broad in the shoulders, thick through the neck, and he wore a clean jacket that didn't quite hide the way his hands hung loose like he was always ready to grab. He laughed loudly at something nobody had said, slapped a buddy on the back, and drifted toward the craft table like he was checking inventory. Mateo's posture tightened without changing. His voice stayed calm as he answered a question from a resident, but his eyes tracked the man's approach. The girl kept drawing, head down, crayon moving in tight strokes, pretending she didn't hear the heavy footsteps stop behind her. The man leaned in just enough to cast a shadow over the paper. "Well, look at that," he said, voice syrupy, performative, meant for an audience. "Ain't this cute?" The girl didn't respond. Her crayon paused, then continued, but her shoulders rose like someone had hooked invisible strings to them. The man's grin widened. "Hey," he said, a little sharper. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart." Still nothing. His eyes flicked to Rex, and something in his expression hardened for a split second before the smile returned. "Dog's got you all brave today, huh?" he added, as if bravery were a joke. Mateo stepped closer, not fast, not aggressive, just present. "Sir," he said, tone polite, "can I help you with something?" The man straightened, hands held out in mock innocence. "Officer Grady," he said, dragging the name like they were old friends. Mateo didn't remember introducing himself, and that alone was a flare in his mind. "Just making sure the kids are having fun," the man went on, eyes sliding back to the girl. "This one here looks a little lost." The word landed with a strange weight, like a claim. The girl's crayon squeaked harder against the paper. Rex moved one step forward, silent, controlled, and positioned himself beside the girl's chair, body angled so the man would have to go through a wall of muscle and training to reach her. No barking, no lunging. Just a shift that changed the geometry of the space. Mateo saw it clearly. Rex was closing a door. The man's gaze dropped to the dog's teeth, then back up, and the grin twitched. "Easy there," he said with a laugh that didn't sound amused. "He bite?" "Only on command," Mateo replied, still calm, still professional, letting the sentence hang in the air like a measured warning. The man chuckled again, louder this time, hoping the sound would make him seem harmless. Around them, conversations thinned. A mother at the coffee table suddenly found her phone fascinating. A volunteer rearranged pamphlets that didn't need rearranging. People who'd been smiling a moment ago looked away, as if looking might make them responsible. The man leaned closer to the girl again, ignoring Mateo like he wasn't there. "Come on now," he said, sweetness gone, voice low enough to feel like a hand on the back of her neck. "Why don't you go find your mama, yeah? Grown-ups are talking." The girl's hand tightened around the crayon until her knuckles blanched. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. She just kept drawing, jaw clenched so tight Mateo could see it. Rex released a sound then, barely audible, a deep vibration that wasn't anger, so much as certainty. Professional warning. The kind of sound that said, "I have your scent, and I have your intent." The man froze for a fraction of a second, and in that pause Mateo saw the real thing under the mask. Irritation, control slipping, the need to remind someone who held power. He forced the grin back onto his face and glanced around, searching for the crowd to back him up, to laugh with him, to shame the officer into playing along. But the crowd had become a wall of turned shoulders. Nobody wanted to be the one in the story. The man's smile sharpened into something thin. "Relax," he said, stepping back with his hands up like a saint. "Just being friendly." His eyes met Mateo's, and the message was clear despite the pleasant tone. "I know where you work. I know where you stand." Then he looked down at the girl one last time, and his voice softened into something that sounded almost kind. "Don't draw nothing ugly, okay?" he murmured. "Would be a shame." He walked away laughing, leaving behind silence that felt heavier than noise. Mateo watched him go, feeling Rex's body still coiled beside the chair, and he understood with a cold clarity that made his stomach tighten. That wasn't a random jerk at a community event. That was an enforcer checking a leash. And the little girl at the table wasn't just shy. She was being managed. After the man drifted off, the event tried to restart itself. The music kept playing, the coffee kept pouring, and people forced their faces back into something like normal. But the space around the craft table stayed charged, as if the asphalt remembered the weight of his shadow. Mateo didn't chase confrontation, not out of fear, but out of discipline. He'd learned the hard way that loud reactions warned the wrong people. He just shifted the scene. "Hey," he said softly to the girl, as if offering a kindness and nothing more. "How about we sit over there where it's quieter? Rex likes the shade." He nodded toward a wooden bench near the edge of the lot, where the building cast a clean line of shadow, away from curious eyes and passing chatter. The girl hesitated only a heartbeat, then gathered her paper and crayons with careful hands, cradling them like fragile evidence, even though, to anyone watching, it was just a child carrying art supplies. Rex moved with them, close enough that his shoulder brushed Mateo's knee, and when they reached the bench, he sat automatically at Mateo's left, then angled his body so he could see both the open lot and the girl at once. Mateo sat at the far end of the bench, leaving the child space, and kept his voice low. "You can draw whatever you want," he said, casual, like a grown-up granting permission. "No rush." The girl nodded, tongue slipping out between her teeth the way kids did when they were concentrating. But there was nothing playful about it. She leaned over the page and began again. And within seconds, Mateo knew this wasn't a thank you card. Her lines weren't whimsical. They were deliberate. She drew a road first, 2 thick crayon strokes curving in a way Mateo recognized with a jolt, the old county route that bent around the river before the bridge. Then she added a side turn, then another, marking a stop sign with a perfect red octagon that looked like she'd stared at it from a car window too many times. She switched to gray and drew a building. Not a house exactly. More like a long rectangle with a pitched roof and a smaller box attached on one side. A shed? A storage place? She shaded the windows dark, all of them, no light inside. Then she drew a door on the side, small, tucked away, and she didn't just draw it. She marked it. A thick black X, pressed so hard the crayon wax built up in ridges. Mateo felt the muscles in his jaw clench. Rex's ears flicked forward, his gaze tracking the girl's hands like he understood the seriousness in the pressure. The girl reached for a white crayon, the kind children ignored because it barely showed, and she used it anyway, scraping it across a darker patch to outline the shape of a vehicle. Not a cartoon car. A boxy van with squared edges, a high roof, and a line along the side where a sliding door would be. She even added a dent near the rear wheel, a small flaw that made it specific. Then she chose black again and drew a symbol on the van's side panel, a circle with 3 slashes inside it, angled like claw marks. It was not a child's imagination. It was a logo. Mateo's pulse slowed in that dangerous way it did when his brain moved from curiosity to procedure. He glanced around the lot without moving his head, checking sightlines, faces, the man in the gray jacket from earlier. Nothing obvious. Still, the bench felt like the only honest place in the whole event. The girl kept going, adding details that made Mateo's skin prickle. A fence line, a patch of trees, a little square that could have been a camera on a pole, drawn so small most adults would miss it. Then, in the lower corner of the page, she drew a tiny figure behind thick vertical lines. Bars. The figure had yellow hair, a round face, and one blue tear that she colored in slowly, like she wanted the sadness to be unmistakable. She drew another door nearby, this one bigger, and shaded it heavy, almost black, leaving only the outline. Behind that door she sketched a second smaller shape, half hidden, like someone crouched where they couldn't be seen unless you knew where to look. When she finished that corner, her hand paused, and for the first time she looked up at Matteo, just for a second. The polite smile tried to appear again, and failed. Then she looked back down and wrote a word at the top, in big, uneven letters. The spelling was wrong, phonetic, childlike. Yet the meaning hit Matteo like a fist. Hush. Only she wrote it the way she heard it, not the way it was taught, something like hush or huas. The mistake made it worse, not better, because it proved she wasn't copying it from a book. She was copying it from life. Matteo kept his voice steady, gentle enough not to scare her, but his insides had gone cold. "That's a really clear picture," he said. "Did you see this place?" The girl didn't answer with a story. She answered with a small nod that looked like it cost her. Rex lowered his head and pressed his nose lightly to her knee, not demanding attention, just offering contact. And the girl's shoulders loosened, as if the dog had taken some of the weight for her. Matteo looked at the drawing again. The road bend, the side door marked, the van, the symbol, the hidden figure. And in that quiet slice of shade, he understood the ugly truth. This wasn't innocence. This was a child turning terror into something she could hand to a protector. And the fact that she'd chosen Rex, chosen the one partner in town that couldn't be bought, made the whole thing feel like a countdown had already started. Matteo didn't snatch the paper from her hands or stand up like a hero in a movie. He did the opposite, because panic was loud, and loud was dangerous. He eased his palm under the edge of the drawing like he was supporting it, not taking it, and lowered himself into a kneel beside the bench so he wasn't towering over her, so his badge wasn't the first thing she saw. "Okay," he said softly, voice warm as coffee even while his mind moved fast. "You did a really good job showing me this." He angled the page so the sun didn't glare off the wax, then tapped a fingertip near the curved road. "This bend right here," he murmured, like they were doing homework together. "Is that by the river?" The girl's tongue pressed against her lip, and she gave a tiny nod. One movement, controlled, like she was afraid bigger would count as talking. Matteo didn't push for a name. Names got kids hurt. "And this turn," he went on, tapping the side road. "You take that after the old bridge?" Another nod. Her eyes stayed on the paper, not on him, like eye contact might become a promise she couldn't keep. Matteo let the silence breathe for a second, just enough to show her she wasn't in trouble. Then he asked the next question the same way, measured and careful. "The building, this long one, does it smell funny?" Her gaze flicked up for a heartbeat, startled, then back down. She nodded again, but this time her nose wrinkled slightly, as if the smell had crawled back into her memory. "Like gas?" Matteo offered, giving her words that didn't force her to invent. She nodded once more. Rex stayed seated, shoulder touching Matteo's thigh, eyes locked on the girl's hands, his calm presence a quiet fence around them. Matteo's eyes, meanwhile, had sharpened into something else entirely, scanning the lot in short, controlled sweeps while his voice stayed gentle. "This door with the X," he said, tapping the black mark. That's the door you go in? The girl's head shook no. Small, immediate. Mateo felt a chill. Okay, he said, not reacting. That's the door someone else goes in? The girl hesitated, then nodded. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the paper until the wax crayon lines creaked. Mateo kept his tone soft, but he stopped tapping the drawing and flattened his hand beside it, grounding the moment. You're doing great, he said. You're not in trouble. You're helping. He pointed at the van. This vehicle. White, big, like this? The girl's nod came quicker now, like confirmation was safer than explanation. Mateo traced the symbol with his finger without touching the wax. And this mark, he said, lowering his voice even more. You've seen it for real. The girl swallowed. One nod. No story. No embellishment. Just yes, 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 like she was terrified of getting one detail wrong and making everything worse. Mateo leaned back slightly, as if stretching his knees, but the movement was a signal. He lifted his chin toward Officer Liza Chen across the lot by the cruiser tour. And when she glanced over, he gave her the smallest hand motion. 2 fingers. Then a point toward the street. Then a subtle circle. Discreet check. Run plates if you see the van. Find the symbol. Quiet. No sirens. Liza's face didn't change, but her eyes understood immediately. She nodded once and drifted away as if she'd just remembered something she left in the car. Mateo turned back to the girl as if nothing had happened, because the most important thing in that moment was keeping her world stable. That word, he said, indicating the letters at the top. You heard someone say that? The girl's shoulders rose, then fell. She nodded, slower now, and her eyes shone with a wetness she refused to let spill. Mateo felt a surge of controlled fury, the kind that stayed behind his ribs until it could be used. Okay, he said, steady. You don't have to tell me who, just... When you heard it, was it inside that building? The girl paused, then nodded. Rex made a quiet huff through his nose. Not a growl, not a bark. An impatient little breath like he hated the memory too. Mateo reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out his phone, not aiming it at her, just holding it low. He took a photo of the drawing with the casualness of a father, snapping a kid's art, then slid the phone away. I'm going to keep you safe, he said. Not dramatic, not loud, just a statement, like a vow said under the breath. The girl finally looked at him then, really looked, searching his face for the lies she'd learned to expect from adults. Mateo didn't offer her promises he couldn't keep. He offered her procedure, the one kind of truth he trusted. I'm going to ask you a couple more yes or no questions, he said. And then we're going to go inside where it's quiet, all right? She gave the smallest nod, and Mateo's gaze lifted past her again, razor-sharp, cataloging faces, exits, vehicles. Because he could feel it now, like a storm front just beyond the horizon. That whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was beginning. Mateo guided the girl toward the station with the kind of calm that looked ordinary from the outside. One hand holding the drawing flat so it wouldn't crease, the other resting lightly on Rex's harness as they walked through the lingering crowd and into the cool breath of the lobby. The door chime rang, bright and innocent, and for a moment, the normal sounds tried to reclaim the space. A printer whirring behind the counter, a radio crackle from a back hallway, the soft murmur of someone signing a form. Mateo kept his pace even, kept his shoulders loose, because the safest thing he could offer the child was the illusion of routine. He steered her toward the benches by the community bulletin board, away from the main desk, and crouched again to her level. "You're doing good," he said, voice low. "Just sit right here with Rex, okay?" Rex immediately sat beside her, close but not crowding, his calm weight like a warm wall. Mateo slid the drawing into an evidence sleeve he'd snagged from the supply cabinet on the way in. Clear plastic, rigid, official. The moment the paper disappeared behind that transparency, it stopped being a kid's artwork and became what it was, a report without words. He took another photo, not because he didn't already have one, but because redundancy saved cases. Then he wrote a quick note on a small tag, date, time, location, initials, and clipped it to the sleeve. His movements were smooth, practiced, and silent. That was when the supervisor appeared, as if the building itself had a reflex. Sergeant Halverson had the kind of easy, folksy face that looked good at parades, ruddy cheeks, silver hair, a permanent half-smile that suggested he'd once been the kid who carried chairs after church. He strolled into the lobby with a paper cup of coffee, nodding at the clerk. And when his eyes landed on the girl and Rex, his smile widened just a touch too fast. "Well now," Halverson said, voice warm enough to be comforting if you didn't listen to the edges. "What's all this?" Mateo didn't snap to attention. He simply turned, keeping his body angled so he was between the sergeant and the child without making it obvious. "Community event," Mateo said evenly. "She brought something in." Halverson's gaze dropped to the evidence sleeve in Mateo's hand, then flicked to the girl's face, then back up. "A drawing?" he guessed, chuckling softly as if the answer was already settled. "Come on, Grady. It's just a kid's drawing." The words were light, but his eyes weren't. They were evaluating, measuring how much Mateo had understood. Halverson took a slow sip of coffee and extended his free hand toward the sleeve. "Let me see it," he said, still smiling. Mateo didn't pull it away dramatically. He simply shifted his grip, turning the sleeve so the sergeant could see without taking it, an old tactic that looked polite while protecting control. Halverson's eyes scanned the page, and for the first time the smile faltered. Just a hairline crack, before he patched it back up. "Kids watch too much TV," he said, waving it off. "Vans, secret doors. You know how their little minds run." He leaned closer, lowering his voice like a man offering wise advice. "Look, let's not make a thing out of this. Her mom's outside, right? Send her home. Give her a sticker. We don't need rumors starting over some crayon art." Mateo felt Rex's body stiffen beside the bench. The dog didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply fixed Halverson with a stare so steady it looked almost human. Ears forward, eyes flat, reading something in the sergeant's scent or posture that Mateo couldn't fully name, but trusted instinctively. Halverson noticed the stare and laughed a little too loudly. "Easy, boy," he said, as if Rex were being silly. "Ain't nobody here to hurt you." Rex didn't blink. Mateo kept his voice calm. "I already logged it," he said. "Not confrontational, just factual. I took photos. I'm keeping the original secured." Halverson's smile tightened. "Logged it?" he repeated, the friendly tone slipping a fraction. "Mateo, it's a community day. People are watching. You want to spook folks? Over a child's scribbles?" He reached again, fingers curling like he expected compliance. "Give it here. I'll handle it." Mateo didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply stepped half a foot to the side, blocking the reach with the most boring obstacle in the world, his own body. "Respectfully, Sarge," he said, soft as a lullaby and twice as firm. "I'm handling it." Halverson's eyes hardened behind the smile. "You're getting worked up," he said. And there it was. The minimization, the gentle shove back into silence. He tilted his head toward the girl as if she were the problem. "She's probably scared enough. Don't drag her into police business." The girl's hands clenched in her lap, and her gaze dropped to the floor as if she could make herself invisible. Rex shifted closer to her knee, pressing his shoulder against her shin with quiet insistence. Mateo glanced at the sergeant's coffee cup, at the relaxed stance, at the way Halverson positioned himself just so, between Mateo and the front doors, between the child and the exit, as if controlling flow was second nature. Mateo's chest went cold. He kept his face neutral and nodded once, like a man agreeing. "Understood," he said. Then he turned toward the clerk window. "Darla," he called casually, "could you print me an extra evidence intake form?" Halverson's eyes flicked sharp. Darla blinked, surprised, then nodded. Mateo turned back and crouched beside the girl again, lowering his voice so only she and Rex could hear. "You did the right thing," he murmured. Then, just loud enough to be heard by Halverson, he added, "I'll walk her to her guardian and make sure she gets home safe." It sounded like compliance. It wasn't. As he spoke, he slipped the evidence sleeve into a secure folder and tucked it under his arm. The original stayed with him. The photos were already on his phone. And Rex kept staring at Halverson with that unblinking certainty, like the dog could smell a lie hiding under aftershave and coffee breath. Halverson's smile returned, too wide, too quick, as if the problem had been handled. But Mateo felt the opposite. The system had just tried to swallow the truth, and the fact that it smiled while doing it made everything in Mateo's gut tighten into one clear conclusion. Whatever the girl had drawn, someone in this building wanted it quiet. 2 miles away, in a place that didn't show up on any tourist pamphlet, the air was warmer than it should have been for a winter morning, heated by industrial fans and the low hum of machinery that never fully slept. A single fluorescent tube buzzed over a scarred table where a county road map lay, flattened under a paperweight, corners curling from being used too often. Polished boots stood around it. 3 sets, close enough that their shadows overlapped, and the men wearing them kept their voices down out of habit, not because they feared anyone hearing. One of them, the loud one from the station lot, rolled a toothpick between his lips as if he had all the time in the world, his grin returning now that he was away from uniforms and public eyes. "Town loves their little parade," he murmured, tapping the map with one thick finger. "They clap, they drink coffee, they forget." Another man, gray jacket, sharper face, the kind of clean cut that made him look like a respectable businessman at a distance, didn't smile. He slid a folder across the table, and the symbol on the cover caught the light. A circle with 3 slashes inside, the same mark the girl had pressed into paper with childish wax. "Don't get sloppy," he said, voice flat. "We're past the forget stage." The third man stayed mostly in shadow, sleeves rolled to the forearms, hands clean and still. He didn't need to perform confidence. He wore it. He pointed to the bend in the road on the map, then to a side turn marked with a pen dot. "Time window closes at dusk," he said. "We move what needs moving, we seal what needs sealing, and by morning the town goes back to believing it's safe." The toothpick man snorted softly. "It is safe," he said, "for them, as long as they keep their heads down." The gray jacket man opened the folder, revealing clipped papers, a printed schedule of the station's community day, and a photograph taken from a distance. Mateo beside Rex, the crowd around them. Another photo slid out beneath it. The little girl near the craft table, head bent, crayon in hand. The room's temperature seemed to drop a degree. She was there, the gray jacket man said, and for the first time his voice carried something like irritation. At the station. The toothpick paused mid-roll. So? He replied, but the grin on his face tightened. The man in shadow didn't answer immediately. He stared at the photo as if weighing how many problems one small kid could cause, then spoke with quiet precision. Kids draw what they see, he said. They also draw what they're told. The gray jacket man's jaw flexed. Either way, she put eyes on things she shouldn't, he said. And she went to the one unit in that building that can't be waved off with a smile. The toothpick man's grin finally slipped. The dog, he muttered, like the word tasted bad. The man in shadow reached for a phone, new, clean, unregistered, and dialed from memory, turning away slightly, as if even the walls didn't deserve the full sound of his plan. The line rang once, twice. A click. Halverson, a voice answered with practiced cheer that didn't match the room. The man in shadow didn't bother with pleasantries. The kid made contact, he said, with the K9 handler. There was a fraction of silence on the other end, the kind that gave away a smile being forced into place. It's handled, Halverson replied, too quickly. I told him it was nothing. Told him, the man in shadow repeated, and the words carried a warning. Is it nothing? Halverson's breath shifted, the smallest tell. He's logging it, Halverson admitted, voice lower now. But I can contain it. The man in shadow's eyes stayed on the photo of the girl. Containment is a sequence, he said, not a wish. He glanced at the gray jacket man, who gave a minute shake of his head. No patience for delays. You have 10 minutes to confirm the paper is gone, the man in shadow continued. Original. Not a copy. Not a photo on a phone. Gone. Halverson swallowed audibly. Understood, he said. The man in shadow ended the call without goodbye. The gray jacket man exhaled through his nose. If the handler already photographed it, then we move faster, the toothpick man cut in, trying to sound tough again. But his knee bounced once under the table. The man in shadow didn't look up. He dialed another number, shorter this time. The phone rang. It rang again. Then, abruptly, the line went dead. No voicemail, no ring, just a hard silence like someone had cut the wire. He stared at the screen for half a second, then turned the phone over in his hand, as if it had betrayed him. Our driver's offline, he said calmly. Or he got nervous. The gray jacket man's eyes sharpened. Or he got stopped, he said. Outside the station, across the street where a row of bare trees pretended to be a park, a white van idled with its engine running a little too smooth, a little too long, exhaust puffing in steady breaths while its driver didn't look at the building directly. Just watched it through the reflection in the windshield like a man who knew what watching looked like. The symbol on the side panel was partially covered with road grime, but it was there if you knew to search for it. And inside that van, a radio crackled once and then fell silent, as if the town itself had decided to stop making noise right before something broke. Back in the station, the lobby's brightness felt fake now, like stage lighting trying to sell a happy ending. And Mateo could feel eyes on him even when nobody was looking directly, glances that skated away the second he turned. He kept moving like everything was normal, because normal was camouflage. He walked the girl toward the front doors with Rex beside her, and Halverson hovering a few steps back, still wearing that parade day smile like a mask glued on too tight. Mateo paused at the threshold as if he were simply checking that the child found her guardian, and he scanned the street through the glass with the same lazy look any officer used 100 times a day. Across the road, A white van sat at the curb with its engine idling. Too patient for a delivery. Too still for a parent picking up a kid. Mateo didn't stare. He let his gaze slide past it like it was nothing. But he memorized the dent by the rear wheel, the way the grime on the side panel couldn't quite hide a circle with 3 slashes inside. Rex's ears lifted, his posture tightening in that silent, professional way that said, same scent, same threat. Mateo's hand tightened on the harness for half a second, a private signal, then relaxed again. He pushed the lobby doors open and stepped outside with the girl, letting the winter air hit his face like a reset. Her guardian stood near the coffee table with a phone pressed to her ear, eyes tired, shoulders hunched. When she saw the girl, she ended the call too fast and forced a smile. Mateo kept his voice gentle and public. "Ma'am," he said, "she did a great drawing today. Really talented." He didn't mention maps, vans, doors, bars. Not out here. Not with the van across the street. The woman nodded vaguely, distracted, and Mateo felt a flash of anger on the child's behalf. How alone you could be, even standing next to your own adult. The girl glanced at Rex once, just once, and her expression tightened like she was trying not to cry. Rex leaned forward and touched his nose to her sleeve, soft and quick, then sat back as if he understood this was goodbye. Mateo watched them leave, mother tugging the girl's wrist, the girl turning her head half a second too late like she wanted to look back but couldn't risk it. And then he walked Rex inside without hurrying, because hurrying would be a flare. Halverson clapped him lightly on the shoulder as they passed the lobby bench. "Good man," the sergeant said, voice easy. "That's how we do it. Keep things calm." Mateo forced a neutral nod and kept walking, folder with the evidence sleeve tucked under his arm like it was a simple clipboard. "Yes, sir," he said, the safest lie in law enforcement. He took Rex down the side hallway toward the K9 room, away from the front desk and the glass. And only when the door closed behind them did he allow his face to change. Eyes narrowing, mouth tightening, brain clicking through steps. He set the evidence sleeve in a locked drawer, snapped a photo of the drawer's seal number, then crouched to Rex and rubbed the dog's chest slowly, grounding them both. "Good," he murmured. "Stay sharp." Rex stared at the door as if he could see through it. A soft knock came 5 minutes later, too timid for a supervisor, too hesitant for a confident patrol officer. Mateo opened the door to find Jessa Pike, a civilian records clerk barely out of her 20s, holding a stack of forms against her chest like armor. Her cheeks were pale, and her eyes darted down the hallway before landing on Rex, then Mateo. "Officer Grady," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the second syllable, like it had been holding weight all day. Mateo didn't invite her in with a big gesture. He simply stepped aside. "Jessa," he said calm. "What's wrong?" She slipped inside and shut the door behind her with shaking hands, then leaned back against it as if she expected someone to burst through. I saw you with her," she said, nodding toward the lobby as if the girl was still there. "The drawing." Mateo didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He waited, letting silence do what it did best. Pull truth forward. Jessa swallowed hard. "I tried to tell someone," she blurted. "Weeks ago. I saw something in the access logs and I told Sergeant Halverson, and he told me to forget it. He said it was county maintenance. He said I was being dramatic." Her eyes shone with panic now, and she dug into the stack of forms, fingers fumbling until she pulled out a single page folded tight enough to crease. "But I didn't forget," she whispered. "I copied it." She handed it to Mateo like it might burn her. Mateo unfolded it slowly. Keycard access report, date and timestamps, entries that should have belonged to station employees and didn't. A badge ID that wasn't on the current roster, swiping into the evidence room after hours. Another swipe into the armory. And then, like a punchline no one laughed at, an access record for the old county storage annex, an outbuilding the department technically owned but never used, sitting on the edge of town by the river bend. Mateo felt his pulse steady into something cold. "This annex," he said quietly. Jessa nodded fast, tears threatening. "And there's more," she whispered. She glanced at Rex, then back at Mateo, and her voice dropped even lower. I copied a logbook entry, the dispatch log, calls that went missing." She shoved another folded sheet into his hand, and Mateo saw gaps in the record. Blank spaces where entries had been manually overridden, timestamps that didn't match radio archives. "They told me it was a system glitch," Jessa said, voice breaking. "But glitches don't erase the same address 3 times. Mateo's eyes flicked to the address field, and his stomach tightened. The county road bend, the side turn after the bridge, exactly like the girl's drawing. Jessa dug one last time into her stack, and this time she produced a small thumb drive, cheap plastic, the kind given away at conferences. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. "I'm not supposed to have this," she said. "But I couldn't sleep, so I pulled camera snapshots from the parking lot feed. Not the good cameras, the old one that no one checks." She sucked in a breath that sounded like a sob. "It shows a white van. Same symbol, same dent. Coming and going at night." Mateo took the drive without letting his fingers touch hers. Not because he was afraid of her, but because chain of custody mattered. And if this went where his gut said it was going, every detail would be attacked. He reached into his desk and pulled out an evidence bag, sealed the thumb drive, wrote the time, wrote Jessa's name, and asked in the gentlest tone imaginable, "Did anyone see you give me this?" Jessa shook her head, terrified. "No," she whispered. "I waited until I saw you take the dog back. I thought you might be the only one who wouldn't laugh." Mateo didn't smile. He didn't reassure her with empty comfort. He gave her something better, a plan. "Jessa," he said, voice firm but kind, "you did the right thing. Now you're going to do one more right thing." He stepped to the door, cracked it open, and looked both ways down the hall. Empty. He shut it again and pulled out his phone. Not the station line, not dispatch, not anyone who owed Halverson a favor. He scrolled to a contact he hadn't used in months, an investigator in the State Bureau who handled public integrity cases, the kind of unit that showed up when local systems were compromised. Rex watched him with intense stillness, as if he understood this was the hinge moment. Mateo pressed call and kept his voice low. "This is Officer Mateo Grady, KE9 Unit, Brookvale," he said when the line picked up. "I need to report suspected corruption and an active threat involving a minor and a secured county property. I have physical evidence and an insider witness. I am requesting an external response with clean jurisdiction." He listened, eyes fixed on the sealed evidence bag in his hand, and when the voice on the other end asked for details, Mateo didn't ramble. He gave coordinates, dates, logs, the girl's drawing, the van, the symbol. He heard Jessa's breath hitch behind him, and he turned just enough to meet her eyes. "You're not alone," he said. Not into the phone, but to her, and in the same breath he added to the investigator, "For everyone's safety, do not contact my supervisor or local command. Assume the chain is compromised." On the other end of the line, the tone changed. No longer polite, now procedural and sharp. Mateo felt it like a door, locking the right way. Outside, through the narrow window in the K9 room, the white van's engine noise drifted faintly across the street, patient as a predator. Inside, Rex's ears tilted toward it, and Mateo knew the next move wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a counter-move. They came just after dusk, not with screaming sirens and light bars, but with the quiet, surgical precision of people who understood that noise gives bad men time to run. 3 unmarked sedans and a dark SUV rolling into town like any other travelers. Engines low, windows reflecting nothing but the bruised pink sky. They parked without crowding the station, stepped out in plain jackets with clipped badges at their belts, and moved like a single thought, state bureau agents outside the local pecking order, bringing jurisdiction that didn't care who shook whose hand at the diner. Mateo met them in the K9 room, heart steady. Rex already pacing with that coiled readiness that meant he could feel the mood without needing the words. Maps were spread, Jess's keycard logs laid out, the girl's drawing in its evidence sleeve at the center of it all, like a child's prophecy. And the lead agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that sounded allergic to nonsense, pointed to the curved road, the annex dot, the side door with the X, and said simply, "We start here." Radios whispered instead of shouted as units split. One team to quietly secure the station and its compromised command, another to roll toward the river bend under the cover of night. Mateo rode with the latter, Rex in the back, the dog's breath steady behind his shoulder as the car's headlights washed the familiar road in pale stripes. When they killed the lights a quarter-mile out and coasted the rest of the way, the world seemed to hold its breath. The annex crouched in the trees like a secret that had waited too long to be told. In the dim spill of a single dirty security lamp, Mateo could see the building exactly as the girl had drawn it. Long main structure, smaller jutting side room, fence line cutting a jagged shape through the brush, and there, by the side door, the shadow of a van with a tired dent by the rear wheel and a symbol on its panel that looked like claw marks circling back on themselves. The agents fanned out with practiced choreography, dark shapes gliding to their positions, boots barely whispering on gravel, one hand signal, then another. And Rex was unclipped, harnessed short at Mateo's side, every muscle humming with focused energy. "Ready," Mateo breathed, both to the handler on his left and to the dog at his knee. The breach was a series of crisp images more than sounds. The pop of a ram against metal, the explosive brightness of flashlights slicing through darkness, the staccato commands, "Police, don't move," layered with the low, terrifying calm in Mateo's own voice as he directed Rex down a hallway that reeked of chemicals and cold fear. A door at the end, just where the drawing had placed it, heavy and wrong. Rex's nose slammed to the crack at the bottom, body going rigid. Then he threw a look back at Mateo that said everything a report later would translate into alerted strongly to human scent in distress. They forced that door, and the world shrank to the sight of a small, trembling figure in the corner of a makeshift cell. Yellow hair matted, wrists bruised where rope had been, eyes blown wide with disbelief that the rescue she'd stopped hoping for had arrived in the shape of strangers and one very serious dog. "You're safe," Mateo said, dropping to one knee, voice steady even as his chest burned. "You're safe now." Rex lay down a few feet away, lowering his head, instinctively making himself smaller so he didn't add to the terror. And when the rescued girl, older than the artist by a few years, but with the same 2 old eyes, reached a shaking hand out, he sniffed it gently and stayed still as stone, letting her memorize the feeling of a protector that wouldn't leave. In the corridors behind them, cuffs clicked shut on the wrists of men who had believed the annex was forgotten. each ratcheting snap like the first domino falling, then another and another. The driver from the van, the loud enforcer from the community event caught trying to slip out a back door. A technician with a clipboard who'd thought his white coat made him untouchable. Back at the station, the second team's work played out in a different kind of theater. Agents stepping in behind counters, quietly asking officers to set their sidearms on desks. A warrant unfolding like a curtain in Halverson's office, and the sergeant's folksy smile cracking clean open when he realized the badges in front of him outranked every favor he'd ever collected. They walked him out the front, hands cuffed behind his back, under the same humming lights and bulletin boards where he'd once shaken hands with half the town. Now, those hands were holding phones up. Recording, jaws clenched in a mix of shock and realization as the truth they'd tried not to see marched past them in a pressed uniform and a suddenly very small-looking man. Jessa watched from the lobby doorway, tears streaking her cheeks, but her chin lifted. And when Halverson's eyes flicked to hers, he didn't find the scared clerk he'd told to forget. He found a witness who'd chosen not to. The enforcer went next, then the gray-jacket businessman. Each perp walk another falling tile in the pattern the state agents would spend months laying out in court. Time moved strangely in the weeks that followed. Reports, interviews, statements taken in rooms that now felt properly heavy. But the town changed, slowly, like thaw. The annex doors were welded shut, the van impounded and photographed from every angle. The symbol that had once been a private mark, now a piece of evidence on a courtroom screen. And then, on a soft morning that smelled like rain and fresh coffee, the station lobby hummed again, but with a quieter kind of energy. No big event. Just a normal day where parents paid parking tickets and officers filled out forms and Rex dozed by Mateo's desk, one ear always tilted toward the world. The front doors opened with a familiar chime, and the little girl walked in. Not hunched this time, not hiding behind oversized sleeves, but clutching a new piece of paper and scanning the room until her gaze landed on the dog. Rex stood immediately, tail wagging in a slow, dignified arc, and Mateo felt a knot in his chest loosen as he crossed the lobby. "You brought him another picture?" he asked. And the girl's smile, real, full, still a little shy, but brighter than the harsh station lights, answered before her nod did. She held it out with both hands, and Mateo unfolded it carefully. This time, it wasn't a map or a van or a dark room. It was the station building under a big yellow sun. The doors drawn wide open. Stick-figure officers standing beside a proud, clearly labeled police dog with a tiny badge around his neck, and out front, two small figures holding hands, one with yellow hair, one with brown, with no bars between them at all. In the corner, in those same uneven letters, she'd written a single word that needed no correction. Safe. Rex pressed his head against Mateo's hip and then leaned down so the girl could wrap her arms around his neck. And the narrator's final thought settled over the moment like gentle closing credits. In a world where monsters hid behind smiles and systems sometimes forgot their purpose, sometimes the bravest witness in town was the one holding a crayon. And the smartest thing a hardened canine ever did was listen to her.